contempt. Trevor Holbrook had learned early in life that respect wasn't given, it was taken. Growing up in foster care after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, he developed an iron will masked by quiet observation. While other kids acted out, Trevor studied. While they fought, he planned. By 18, he'd earned a full scholarship to Stanford, not through athletics or charm, but through pure, relentless intelligence. That's where he met Brooke Whitmore, the golden daughter of real estate mogul Richard Whitmore. She was everything Trevor wasn't: privileged, connected, effortlessly beautiful. Her world was country clubs and charity galas. His was night shifts at the campus library and ramen dinners. Yet somehow, she'd been drawn to his intensity, his drive. Or so he'd thought. "You're different from the others," she'd whispered during their first kiss under the Stanford oak trees. "You're real." Trevor had believed her. Even when her father, Richard, made his disapproval clear with cold handshakes and cutting remarks about scholarship cases. Even when her brother Tyler would smirk and ask if Trevor needed money for dinner when they went out. Trevor had endured it all because he loved Brooke, and more importantly, because he had plans. The Whitmore family owned Whitmore Properties, a mid-tier real estate development company that had built half the suburbs in their Connecticut hometown of Millfield. They were comfortable, respected, but not truly wealthy. Not like the families they desperately tried to emulate. Trevor saw their insecurities masked as arrogance, their fear disguised as superiority. After graduation, Trevor had started small, a consulting firm helping tech startups navigate real estate acquisitions. He'd worked 18-hour days, building relationships, accumulating knowledge, and most importantly, accumulating leverage. Meanwhile, Brooke had accepted a token position at her father's company, more interested in planning their wedding than building a career. The wedding had been a Whitmore production, expensive, ostentatious, designed to show the world their status. Trevor had paid for half of it with his first major consulting fee, but Richard had made sure everyone knew the Whitmores were generous enough to cover the other half for their future son-in-law. That was 8 years ago. Since then, Trevor had quietly built an empire while the Whitmores remained stagnant. His consulting firm had evolved into Holbrook Acquisitions, a private investment company that specialized in distressed assets and corporate restructuring. He'd made strategic investments, cultivated relationships with powerful people, and most importantly, he'd learned every secret, every weakness, every pressure point of anyone who'd ever looked down on him. The irony wasn't lost on him that while the Whitmores still saw him as the poor scholarship kid Brooke had married out of pity, he now controlled assets worth more than their entire family legacy. He'd structured everything through shell companies and offshore holdings, maintaining the appearance of modest success while building real power. Brooke had grown distant over the years, spending more time at her parents' house than their own. She'd stopped asking about his work, stopped pretending to be interested in his life. Trevor had noticed the changes, the secret phone calls, the unexplained absences, the way she'd started working late at the family company with Chase Summers, the new development manager her father had hired. Chase was everything the Whitmores valued: old money family, Princeton education, the kind of easy charm that opened doors. He was also weak, entitled, and completely unaware that Trevor had been monitoring his every move for months. The affair had been predictable, almost boring in its obviousness. Trevor could have confronted them then, could have ended it quickly. But he'd learned patience in foster care, and patience was a weapon they'd never expect him to wield. Instead, he'd waited, watched, and planned. Every humiliation, every condescending comment, every moment they'd made him feel small, he'd cataloged it all. Tonight, as he drove home early from the Phoenix conference, Trevor allowed himself a cold smile. The pieces were finally in place. The conference had been the perfect alibi, the final detail in a plan 2 years in the making. His phone buzzed with updates from his associates, confirming that everything was proceeding as scheduled. Tomorrow, the Whitmores would learn what it meant to underestimate Trevor Holbrook. Tonight, they'd have their last laugh at his expense. He pulled into his driveway and saw the cars: Richard's Mercedes, Tyler's BMW, Chase's Porsche. Through the windows, he could see Brooke laughing, wine glass in hand, surrounded by her family and their golden boy. They thought they were celebrating. Trevor straightened his tie and walked toward the house. The performance was about to begin. Chapter 2: The Breaking Point. The front door was unlocked. a small detail that spoke volumes about how little the Whitmores respected his home, or him. Trevor stepped inside to the sound of laughter from the living room, wine glasses clinking, his wife's voice carrying over the others with an edge of hysteria he'd learned to recognize. And then he said he'd be back by Sunday, as if anyone cared. Brooke was saying, her words slightly slurred. Sometimes I think he forgets this isn't his parents' house. Oh wait, he never had one. The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel. Trevor set his briefcase down quietly and loosened his tie. Through the archway, he could see them arranged like a tableau of privilege. Brooke curled on the couch next to Chase, her father Richard in his usual commanding position by the fireplace. Tyler sprawled in Trevor's favorite chair with characteristic arrogance. Trevor. Brooke's voice called out, surprised but not pleased. You're back early. He stepped into the living room, taking in the scene with practiced calm. Empty wine bottles on his coffee table, Chase's hand resting possessively on Brooke's knee, Tyler's feet up on his ottoman. They'd made themselves at home, as they always did. Flight got in ahead of schedule, Trevor said evenly. Don't let me interrupt. Richard barely glanced up from his whiskey. How was your little conference? Meet any other consultants? The emphasis on consultants was deliberate, designed to diminish. Tyler snickered from the chair. Did you at least get some good networking in? Maybe hand out some business cards. Trevor nodded toward the bar cart in the corner. Mind if I get a drink? It's been a long day. Brooke exchanged a look with Chase that didn't escape Trevor's notice. Actually, we're having a private family discussion. Important business stuff. You probably wouldn't understand. The dismissal hung in the air like smoke. Trevor had endured 8 years of these moments. The subtle and not-so-subtle reminders that he would never truly belong. Never be anything more than the charity case they'd allowed into their circle. Of course, Trevor said quietly. I'll just... Actually, Richard interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. Since you're here, there's something we should discuss. He gestured to an empty chair across from the group, clearly positioning Trevor as an outsider facing judgment. Trevor remained standing. I'm listening. Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Brooke has been doing exceptional work at the company, really stepping up, taking on more responsibility. Chase here has been instrumental in helping her develop her potential. Chase's hand squeezed Brooke's knee, a gesture so proprietary it made Trevor's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She's a natural, Chase said, his voice smooth with false sincerity. Born for this business. The thing is, Tyler chimed in, leaning forward with obvious enjoyment. Family businesses are complicated. They require understanding, loyalty, the right kind of breeding. Brooke giggled, the sound high and sharp. Tyler, you're terrible. But she wasn't protesting, Trevor noted. She was enjoying it. Richard set down his whiskey with deliberate precision. What Tyler's trying to say, though perhaps not diplomatically, is that Whitmore Properties is entering a new phase. We're considering restructuring. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning. Trevor kept his expression neutral, but inside, something cold and final clicked into place. Restructuring how, he asked. Well, Richard continued. Brooke will be taking on a more significant role, Vice President of Development. It's a big responsibility, one that requires the right kind of support. Chase straightened, his smile widening. I'll be there to help her every step of the way. We work very well together. The innuendo was barely concealed. Brooke blushed and looked down, but not with shame, with pleasure. Tyler couldn't contain himself anymore. What Dad's trying to say is that some people are natural leaders, and others are, well, followers. There's no shame in knowing your place. Tyler, Richard said, but his tone held more amusement than disapproval. Trevor walked slowly to the bar cart, his movements measured and deliberate. He poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, his whiskey, from his bar, in his house. The irony wasn't lost on him. You know, Brooke said, her voice taking on a cruel edge Trevor had never heard before. Sometimes I think about that night we met. You were so earnest, so grateful for everything. I felt sorry for you. She looked around the room, gathering her audience. I mean, here was this poor scholarship kid who'd never been to a real restaurant, never owned a decent suit. He was like a lost puppy. The room was silent except for the crackling fire. Trevor took a sip of his whiskey and waited. I thought I could help him, Brooke continued, emboldened by the attention. You know, show him how things worked in the real world. But some people, she shrugged elegantly. Some people just never learn to swim in deeper waters. Richard raised his glass. To charity cases, he said with a smirk. We told you he'd amount to nothing, didn't we, sweetheart? Tyler leaned forward, his voice dropping to a stage whisper meant to be heard. The divorce is finalized next week. Just walk away now. Save yourself the embarrassment. The silence that followed was deafening. Trevor could feel their eyes on him, waiting for his reaction, expecting him to break, to rage, to give them the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. Instead, he finished his whiskey in one smooth motion and set the glass down gently. I understand, he said quietly. The simplicity of his response seemed to deflate them slightly. They'd been expecting fireworks, tears, perhaps begging. His calm acceptance was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. Trevor straightened his jacket and looked around the room one last time, memorizing their faces, the smug satisfaction, the cruel pleasure, the complete certainty that they had won. Well, he said finally, I should let you get back to your celebration. He walked toward the stairs, each step measured and purposeful. Behind him, he heard Tyler mutter something about knowing when you're beaten, followed by more laughter. At the top of the stairs, Trevor paused and pulled out his phone. 3 text messages, all sent within the last hour while he'd been enduring their performance downstairs. The first was from his lawyer. Divorce papers filed. Everything as discussed. The second was from his financial advisor. Transfers complete. Accounts closed. New structure active. The third was from his business partner in Hong Kong. Acquisition finalized. You now control 73% of target company. Trevor allowed himself one small smile as he typed a response. Execute phase 2. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. He pocketed the phone and walked to his study, where he began packing the few personal items that mattered to him. From downstairs, the laughter continued, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. They thought they'd destroyed him. Tomorrow, they'd learn the difference between breaking a man and underestimating one. Chapter 3, The Revelation. Trevor slept better that night than he had in months. While the Whitmore's celebration continued downstairs until nearly 2 a.m., he'd completed his preparations with methodical precision. By dawn, he was dressed in his best suit, not the modest off-the-rack clothing they expected from him, but a hand-tailored Savile Row original that cost more than Tyler's monthly salary. He descended the stairs at exactly 7:30 a.m. to find the house in shambles. Empty bottles, overturned cushions, and the lingering smell of expensive wine and cheaper decisions. Brooke was passed out on the couch, still in yesterday's clothes, with Chase's arm draped possessively across her waist. Trevor walked to the kitchen and made himself coffee, the domestic normalcy of the action at odds with what was about to unfold. As he sipped his drink, he heard movement from the living room, the guilty stirring of people caught in compromising positions. Trevor. Brooke's voice was thick with sleep and alcohol. What time is it? 7:45, he replied without turning around. The sound of frantic whispering followed, Chase and Brooke trying to decide how to handle their obvious situation. Trevor found their panic amusing. After tonight, it wouldn't matter what they did or didn't explain. His phone buzzed with the first update of the day, morning trades executed. Short positions established. Media contacts confirmed. At exactly 8 a.m., Trevor's phone rang. He answered it on speakerphone, loudly enough for the voices from the living room to carry. Mr. Holbrook? This is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates. The contracts are ready for your signature. The board meeting is confirmed for 9 a.m. Excellent, Trevor replied. And the press release? Drafted and ready to go out immediately following the announcement. Should I confirm the helicopter pickup? Please do. I'll be ready. Trevor ended the call and poured himself another cup of coffee. From the living room came the sound of Chase leaving through the back door and Brooke attempting to make herself presentable. These small deceptions no longer mattered. At 8:45 a.m., Brooke appeared in the kitchen, her hair hastily arranged, her makeup smudged but serviceable. She was clearly preparing for damage control. Trevor, about last night. Don't worry about it, he said, checking his watch. You were celebrating. I understand. His continued calm seemed to unnerve her more than anger would have. I had too much wine. We all did. Sometimes we say things. Sometimes we reveal who we really are. Trevor corrected gently. But like I said, I understand. Before Brooke could respond, the sound of a helicopter approaching made them both look toward the window. Trevor finished his coffee and set the cup in the sink with deliberate care. "What's that?" Brooke asked, her voice rising with confusion. "My ride to work," Trevor replied, straightening his tie. The helicopter, a sleek corporate model with Holbrook Acquisitions emblazoned on the side, settled onto their front lawn with professional precision. The pilot remained at the controls as a man in an expensive suit stepped out and approached the house. Trevor's phone rang again. This time, it was Richard Whitmore. "Trevor? What the hell is going on? There's a helicopter on your lawn, and I just got a call from our bank about some kind of emergency board meeting at Whitmore Properties. You should probably head to the office," Trevor said calmly. "I'll see you there." He ended the call and walked toward the front door, where the man from the helicopter was waiting with a briefcase. "Good morning, Mr. Holbrook," the man said. "I'm David Chun, your attorney. Everything is ready." Brooke followed them outside, her confusion evident. "Trevor, what's happening? Who are these people?" Trevor paused at the helicopter door and turned to face his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, one last time. The morning sun caught the expensive fabric of his suit, the gold of his watch, details she'd never noticed because she'd never truly looked at him. "I'm going to work," he said simply. "My real work." As the helicopter lifted off, Trevor could see Brooke standing on their lawn, her hand shading her eyes as she watched him disappear into the sky. From this height, she looked very small. The flight to Whitmore Properties took 12 minutes. During that time, Trevor's phone exploded with calls and messages, exactly as he'd anticipated. Richard, Tyler, Chase, and finally Brooke, all trying to reach him, all beginning to understand that something fundamental had shifted. The helicopter set down in the parking lot of Whitmore Properties with theatrical precision. Through the conference room windows on the second floor, Trevor could see the emergency board meeting in session. Richard at the head of the table, Tyler and Chase flanking him, the other board members looking confused and concerned. Trevor's attorney handed him the briefcase as they approached the building. "The documentation is complete. Legal has confirmed everything is in order. The media is standing by. And the others? Your partners from the Singapore acquisition are already inside. Mrs. Patterson from the pension fund is on video conference from London. Mr. Rodriguez from the Development Consortium is participating remotely from Mexico City." Trevor nodded. Perfect. The building's lobby was familiar territory. He'd visited often enough over the years, usually trailing behind Brooke for family events or company celebrations. The security guard, Mike, had always been polite but distant, the way service employees treated the family's lesser connections. Today, Mike's eyes widened as Trevor approached with his legal team and the building's actual owner, a detail that would become clear momentarily. "Morning, Mike," Trevor said pleasantly. "Conference room B, isn't it?" Yes, sir, Mr. Holbrook. Should I announce you?" Trevor smiled, the expression containing no warmth whatsoever. "That won't be necessary. They're expecting me." The conference room doors opened with a burst of cold morning air as Trevor's helicopter pilot kept the rotors spinning outside, a reminder that this was not a social call. The board meeting fell silent as Trevor entered, followed by his legal team and two men in expensive suits that none of the Whitmores recognized. Richard Whitmore's face had gone pale. "Trevor? What's the meaning of this?" "This is a private board meeting. Actually," Trevor said, setting his briefcase on the table with deliberate precision. "This is my board meeting now." The silence that followed was profound. Tyler was the first to break it, his voice stammering with confusion. "What are you talking about? This is Whitmore Properties. This is our company." Trevor's attorney opened the briefcase and began distributing documents around the table. As of 6 a.m. this morning, Holbrook Acquisitions, through a consortium of international partners, has acquired controlling interest in Whitmore Properties. 68%, to be precise. Chase leaned forward, his charm replaced by desperation. "That's impossible. This is a private company. The shares aren't for sale." "They weren't," Trevor agreed. "Until this morning, when the primary lenders called in their loans. Apparently, Whitmore Properties has been operating on credit for the last 18 months, secured against assets that were overvalued." Richard's hands were shaking as he reached for the documents. "This can't be legal. You can't just purchase distressed debt at market rates? Foreclose on properties when loans default? acquire assets through legitimate bankruptcy proceedings. Trevor's voice remained perfectly calm. Actually, I can. I have been. For the last 2 years. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Brooke, who had arrived minutes earlier and was standing in the doorway, gripped the frame for support. Every loan extension you received, Trevor continued. Every credit line that kept you afloat when the development deals fell through. Every mysterious investor who bought your commercial properties at above-market rates. That was me. Tyler's face had gone from pale to green. You've been buying our debt. Controlling it, Trevor corrected, waiting for the right moment to call it in. Which was this morning, at exactly 6 a.m., when your payment to Meridian Capital, my holding company, officially went into default. Richard's voice was barely a whisper. Why? Trevor walked to the window overlooking the parking lot, where his helicopter waited like a mechanical vulture. When he turned back to face the room, his expression was colder than any of them had ever seen. Because yesterday, you called me a charity case. You mocked my background, dismissed my worth, and celebrated what you thought was my humiliation. His voice never rose above conversational level, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Because for 8 years, you've treated me like I was beneath you, unworthy of basic respect, lucky to be included in your world. Brooke stepped into the room, her face streaked with tears. Trevor, please. We were drunk. We didn't mean. You meant every word. Trevor cut her off. And now you'll live with the consequences. He gestured to one of his associates, who stepped forward with additional paperwork. Effective immediately, there will be a restructuring of all operations. Mr. Whitmore, your employment is terminated. No severance, no pension, no benefits. Tyler, Chase, same terms. You can't do this, Tyler protested, his voice cracking. This company is our life. It's all we have. Trevor's smile was arctic. You should have thought of that before you decided I'd amount to nothing. Richard tried one last desperate gambit. The family name is on this company. You can't just erase 30 years of. Watch me. Trevor's attorney handed him a final document, which he signed with a flourish before sliding it across the table. As of this moment, Whitmore Properties ceases to exist. Welcome to Holbrook Development Group. The silence in the room was deafening. Outside, the helicopter's rotors continued their steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat counting down the seconds of the Whitmore's former life. Trevor gathered his papers and headed toward the door. As he reached the threshold, he paused and looked back at the devastated faces around the table. Oh, and Brooke? He said, his voice carrying the casual tone of an afterthought. Check your bank accounts. The joint accounts were closed this morning. The house was mortgaged to Meridian Capital, my company, 6 months ago when you needed cash for your mother's medical bills. I called in that loan as well. He stepped into the hallway, then turned back one final time. The divorce papers should be arriving any moment. You'll find the terms generous. You get to keep your dignity. Everything else is mine. As Trevor walked toward the elevator, his phone buzzed with a text message that made him smile for the first time in years. Phase 3 ready for implementation. Awaiting your signal. The elevator doors closed on the sound of Brooke's sobbing and Richard's furious shouting. Trevor adjusted his tie and checked his reflection in the polished steel. Today was just the beginning. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. The news broke at exactly 10:30 a.m., simultaneous across multiple platforms. The headline was simple and devastating. Local real estate dynasty collapses as hidden corporate takeover revealed. By noon, it was trending on social media with a subheading that made Trevor's cold smile return. Scholarship kid emerges as business mogul, destroys family that humiliated him. Trevor watched the coverage from his corporate office, a penthouse suite in downtown Hartford that none of the Whitmores had known existed. The space was sleek, modern, and spoke of the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, including the much smaller Whitmore Properties building in the distance. His assistant, Patricia, knocked and entered with a tablet full of updates. The media response is exceeding projections. We've had calls from the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and 3 different networks requesting interviews. Decline them all, Trevor said without looking away from the window. Let the story tell itself. And the legal challenges? Richard Whitmore's attorney called 6 times this morning. Trevor's expression didn't change. Mr. Whitmore is welcome to challenge any of the acquisitions in court. He'll find that every transaction was meticulously documented and completely legal. He'll also find that litigation is expensive, and he no longer has the resources to sustain a prolonged legal battle. Patricia consulted her notes. There's also the matter of the charity foundation. The Whitmore Family Foundation is technically a separate entity, but they've been using company resources to fund it. Now that the company assets are under our control, dissolve it, Trevor said simply. All charitable commitments made by the foundation will be honored through a new entity under Holbrook Development. But the Whitmore name will be removed from every plaque, every building, every scholarship fund they've ever supported. It was a surgical strike at their legacy, and Trevor knew it would hurt Richard more than any financial loss. The Whitmore name had been their pathway to social standing, their claim to importance in Millfield society. Without it, they would fade into the anonymity they'd always feared. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his private investigator. Chase Summers' background complete. Very interesting. Sending full report. Trevor had hired the investigator months ago, not to find evidence of the affair that had been obvious, but to understand exactly who Chase was and what vulnerabilities he might have. The man had seemed too perfect, too conveniently charming. In Trevor's experience, people who appeared flawless usually had the most to hide. The report arrived minutes later, and Trevor's eyebrows raised as he read. Chase Summers wasn't quite who he claimed to be. His Princeton education was real, but his old money family background was largely fabricated. His father had been a mid-level insurance salesman who died in debt when Chase was 22. The family estate he'd mentioned was actually a rental property his grandmother had used for summer vacations. More interesting was Chase's employment history. He'd been quietly asked to leave his previous position at a Boston development firm after inappropriate conduct with a client's wife. The incident had been hushed up to avoid scandal, but the pattern was clear. Chase Summers was a professional predator who targeted wealthy, unhappy women and used them to advance his career. Trevor forwarded the report to his attorney with a simple note. Ensure this information reaches the appropriate parties. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Holbrook? Mrs. Holbrook is in the lobby. She's asking to see you. Trevor checked his watch. 2:15 p.m. Brooke had made good time, considering she'd probably spent the morning dealing with frozen bank accounts, foreclosure notices, and the reality of her new circumstances. Send her up, he said. While he waited, Trevor reviewed the afternoon's reports. The Whitmore family's financial situation was even worse than he'd anticipated. They'd been living beyond their means for years, using company credit to maintain their lifestyle. The house, his and Brooke's former home, was mortgaged to the hilt. Richard's Mercedes and Tyler's BMW were both leased through company accounts that no longer existed. Even their country club memberships had been paid for with corporate funds. They'd built their entire identity on borrowed money and borrowed time. Trevor had simply called in the debt. The elevator chimed, and Brooke walked into his office. She'd changed clothes since the morning, trading her casual wear for a black dress that emphasized her still impressive figure. Her makeup was perfect, her hair arranged with professional precision. She was dressed for negotiation, for seduction, for whatever it might take to undo what had been done. Trevor didn't offer her a seat. Impressive, Brooke said, looking around the office. When exactly were you planning to mention that you were secretly a millionaire? Billionaire, Trevor corrected quietly. And I wasn't keeping it secret. You simply never asked. She laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria to it. Never asked? Trevor, we were married. How exactly was I supposed to know you were running some kind of corporate empire? You could have paid attention, he replied. You could have shown interest in my work, my life, my goals. Instead, you decided I was boring and beneath your notice. Brooke moved closer to his desk, her voice taking on the pleading tone she'd used during their relationship whenever she wanted something. Trevor, please. We can work this out. Last night was a mistake. We were all drunk, and you revealed who you really are, Trevor finished. Just like you did when you decided to have an affair with Chase. Just like you did every time you let your family treat me like hired help in my own home. Her composure cracked slightly. You know about Chase? I've known for months. I know he's been stealing from the company to pay for his gambling debts. I know he's been using company resources to fund a lifestyle he can't afford. I know he's done this before, with other women, at other companies. Brooke's face went pale. That's not. He loves me. We're going to be together. Trevor's expression remained neutral. You should probably discuss that with him. He left for Boston this morning, right after the board meeting. One-way ticket. He cleaned out his apartment last night while you were passed out on my couch. The words hit her like physical blows. She gripped the edge of his desk for support, her carefully constructed composure finally beginning to crumble. He's not. He wouldn't just leave. Check your phone, Trevor suggested. I imagine you'll find he's blocked your number. With shaking hands, Brooke pulled out her phone and dialed. Trevor could hear the automated message from across the desk. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She tried texting, her fingers moving frantically across the screen. Then she tried calling again. The same message. She looked up at Trevor with genuine panic in her eyes. You did something to him. You threatened him, or... I did nothing, Trevor said truthfully. Chase Summers is a coward and a user. When the situation became complicated, he ran. Just like he ran from Boston when his last scheme fell apart. Brooks sank into the chair across from his desk without being invited. For the first time since Trevor had known her, she looked vulnerable, genuinely afraid. Trevor, please. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can. No, he said simply. We can't. I'll sell my jewelry, my car. I'll get a job. I'll do whatever it takes to. Your jewelry was purchased with funds from joint accounts that I controlled. Legally, it's community property subject to asset division. Your car was leased through the company. As of this morning, you don't own anything except the clothes you're wearing. The finality of his words seemed to break something inside her. Tears began flowing freely, ruining her carefully applied makeup. I don't understand, she whispered. When did you become so cold? Trevor stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below him. I became this the day you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a burden. I became this when your family made me understand that love and respect aren't the same thing. I became this when I realized that being kind was seen as being weak. He turned back to face her, his expression as unmovable as granite. 8 years, Brooke. 8 years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own marriage. 8 years of watching you choose your family's approval over our relationship. 8 years of being tolerated rather than loved. That's not true, she protested. I did love you. You loved the idea of being charitable. You loved having a project, someone to fix, someone to elevate. You never loved me. The truth of his words hung between them like a death sentence. Brooke's sobs grew heavier, her breathing ragged. What happens to us now? She asked through her tears. Trevor returned to his desk and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across to her. Divorce papers. Very generous terms. You get the house in Millfield. It's small, but it's mortgage-free. You get a settlement of $50,000. You get your freedom. Brooke opened the folder with trembling hands. $50,000? Trevor, that's nothing. The house in Millfield is tiny. It's where your grandmother lived. It's where my grandmother lived after she lost everything in the Depression and had to sell the family farm. Trevor corrected. It's where she taught me that survival isn't about what you have. It's about what you're willing to do to keep going. You'll learn. This is revenge, she said, her voice breaking. This is cruel and vindictive, and this is justice. Trevor cut her off. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. This is what happens when you forget that the person you're stepping on might not stay down forever. He pressed a button on his desk, and the elevator doors opened. 2 security guards stood waiting. Brooke, you have until 5 p.m. to remove your personal belongings from the house. Anything left behind becomes property of the estate. She stood on shaking legs, clutching the divorce papers to her chest like a life preserver. Trevor, please. Don't do this. Don't become someone you'll regret being. For just a moment, Trevor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I won't regret anything. I learned a long time ago that regret is a luxury I can't afford. As the security guards escorted her to the elevator, Brooke turned back one last time. What about forgiveness? What about mercy? Trevor's smile returned, cold and final. You should have thought about that before you introduced me as the poor scholarship kid you married out of pity. The elevator doors closed on her tear-streaked face. Trevor returned to his desk and pressed the intercom button. Patricia, contact the media liaison. I want a press conference scheduled for tomorrow morning. It's time to tell my side of the story. Outside his window, storm clouds were gathering over Millfield. Trevor watched them approach with satisfaction. The tempest was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Media Blitz. Trevor's press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the Millfield Country Club, a venue chosen for maximum psychological impact. The same place where he'd been reminded countless times that he didn't belong was now hosting his moment of triumph. The irony was delicious. He arrived in the helicopter, a theatrical touch that sent the message clearly. This wasn't the same man who'd been dismissed and humiliated just 3 days ago. As he stepped onto the manicured lawn where he'd once felt so out of place, Trevor allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The media turnout exceeded expectations. Local news stations, regional papers, and several national business publications had sent representatives. The story had legs. The classic American tale of revenge served cold, with the added spice of corporate intrigue and family drama. Trevor approached the podium with measured confidence. He'd chosen his outfit carefully, an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that whispered wealth without shouting it, a watch that cost more than most people's cars, and the kind of quiet accessories that those in the know would recognize as markers of true power. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the gathered crowd. 3 days ago, my wife introduced me to her family as the poor scholarship kid she married out of pity. Today, I'm here to set the record straight. The opening line sent a ripple of interest through the assembled reporters. This wasn't going to be a standard corporate announcement. My name is Trevor Holbrook, and for the past 8 years, I've allowed my in-laws to believe I was exactly what they thought I was, a charity case, lucky to be included in their world, grateful for whatever scraps of respect they chose to throw my way. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I want to be clear about something from the start. Everything that happened to the Whitmore family in the past 72 hours was completely legal. Every acquisition, every debt purchase, every foreclosure was conducted through proper channels with full documentation. What I did wasn't illegal, it was just thorough. A reporter from the Hartford Courant raised her hand. "Mr. Holbrook, critics are calling this an elaborate revenge scheme. How do you respond to that?" Trevor's smile was measured, professional. "I'd call it market correction. The Whitmore family spent years operating beyond their means, using company resources for personal expenses and making business decisions based on ego rather than economics. When their creditors, myself included, called in their debts, they couldn't pay. That's not revenge, that's capitalism." "But surely," pressed the reporter, "the timing is suspicious." "Why now?" "Because now was when their debt came due," Trevor replied smoothly. "The terms were set 2 years ago when they first approached my investment company for emergency funding. They needed cash, I provided it. They defaulted, I exercised my options." A business journalist from Forbes leaned forward. "Can you tell us about the scope of your holdings?" Whitmore Properties seems to have been a small part of a much larger portfolio. Trevor nodded approvingly. This was the question he'd been waiting for. Holbrook Acquisitions has assets under management totaling approximately $2.8 billion. We specialize in distressed properties, corporate restructuring, and strategic investment in undervalued markets. The Whitmore acquisition represents less than 3% of our total portfolio. The numbers sent a shock through the crowd. Several reporters immediately began furiously texting their editors. This was bigger than anyone had initially understood. "How long have you been building this empire?" asked a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. "Since the day after my wedding," Trevor replied, and for the first time, his professional mask slipped slightly, revealing the steel beneath. "I learned early that respect isn't given freely. It has to be earned, and sometimes it has to be taken." His phone, set on silent, lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. Trevor glanced at it and smiled slightly before declining the call. No doubt it was Richard or Tyler, desperately trying to reach him through intermediaries. "Let them wait." "Mr. Holbrook," called out a reporter from the local NBC affiliate. "What's your response to allegations that you've been deliberately targeting the Whitmore family for years?" "I targeted undervalued assets and over-leveraged companies," Trevor corrected. "If the Whitmore family happened to own those assets, that's a coincidence. Business isn't personal, it's strategic." But even as he said the words, Trevor knew they weren't entirely true. This had always been personal. Every acquisition, every debt purchase, every strategic move had been designed with this moment in mind. The moment when the people who'd looked down on him would finally understand exactly who they'd been dealing with. A young reporter from the Millfield Gazette raised her hand. Sir, there are rumors that you've been investigating other prominent families in the area. Can you comment on that? Trevor's expression didn't change, but internally he approved of the question. His investigation into the Summers family, Chase's supposed connections, had yielded interesting results, as had his examination of several other old money families in the area. I investigate all potential business partners and competitors, he said carefully. Due diligence is standard practice in any significant transaction. The implications hung in the air like a storm cloud. If Trevor had been this thorough with the Whitmores, what might he have discovered about other families? What other skeletons might be hiding in other closets? His assistant Patricia appeared at the edge of the crowd and caught his eye, tapping her watch. Trevor nodded slightly. "I'll take one more question," he announced. The same reporter from the Hartford Courant spoke up again. "Mr. Holbrook, do you have any regrets about the way this has unfolded? Any sympathy for your former wife and in-laws?" Trevor was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a coldness that made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. "I spent 8 years listening to them mock my background, dismiss my potential, and treat me like an unwelcome guest at my own dinner table. I spent 8 years watching my wife choose their approval over our marriage. I spent 8 years being told I should be grateful for their tolerance." He stepped closer to the microphone, his voice dropping to a level that forced everyone to lean in to hear him. "Regret is a luxury I can't afford. Sympathy is a weakness they taught me I couldn't indulge. They wanted to know what I'd amount to." Trevor's smile returned, sharp as a blade. "Now they know." As he walked away from the podium toward his waiting helicopter, reporters shouted follow-up questions that he ignored. The message had been delivered clearly and completely. Trevor Holbrook was no longer the poor scholarship kid they'd dismissed. He was something far more dangerous, a patient predator who'd spent years positioning his pieces, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The helicopter lifted off as his phone began buzzing with calls from investors, business partners, and media outlets wanting to know more about this previously unknown billionaire who'd emerged from the shadows. Trevor let them all go to voicemail. He had more important things to do. Phase 4 was about to begin, and that would require his full attention. The Whitmores had been just the opening move. The real game was yet to come. Chapter 6: Collateral Damage. The morning after the press conference, Trevor was in his office reviewing acquisition reports when Patricia buzzed him with an unexpected update. "Sir, there's been a development with the Whitmore situation. Richard Whitmore is in the hospital." Trevor looked up from his papers, his expression neutral. "What happened?" "Heart attack, apparently. He was found unconscious in his car outside the country club at 6 a.m. this morning. He's stable, but the doctors are calling it stress-induced." Trevor was quiet for a moment. He'd anticipated anger, desperation, even legal challenges. He hadn't specifically planned for medical emergencies, though given Richard's age and lifestyle, it wasn't entirely surprising. "And the family?" "Tyler and Brooke are at the hospital. The mother flew in from Florida this morning." Patricia consulted her tablet. "There's also been some unusual activity around town." "Explain." 3 more families have contacted their accountants about reviewing their finances. The Summers family, apparently related to Chase Summers, has quietly listed their estate for sale. And the mayor's office called asking about your intentions regarding the Riverside Development Project. Trevor's smile was slight, but satisfied. Fear was spreading through Millfield's elite circles like a contagion. If he could dismantle the Whitmores so thoroughly, what might he do to others? The uncertainty was almost as effective as direct action. "Any word from Chase himself?" Still radio silent. "Our Boston contact confirms he's in the city, but he's avoiding all calls. Apparently, he's told several people he's considering moving to Europe." The coward's escape route, Trevor thought. Typical. His intercom buzzed again. "Sir, Tyler Whitmore is here to see you. He says it's about his father." This was unexpected. Tyler had always been the most arrogant of the Whitmores, the one most convinced of his own superiority. For him to come here, hat in hand, suggested desperation beyond what Trevor had anticipated. "Send him up," Trevor said. Tyler looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled, and there was a desperate edge to his movements that spoke of a man watching his world collapse in real time. "Trevor," he began the moment he stepped off the elevator, "we need to talk." "Do we?" Trevor remained behind his desk, not offering a seat. I thought we'd covered everything at the board meeting. Tyler moved closer, his hands clasped in front of him like a supplicant. My father is in the hospital. The doctors say the stress could have killed him. This has gone far enough. Your father's health issues aren't my responsibility, Trevor replied coolly. If he can't handle the stress of business, perhaps he shouldn't have been running a company. God damn it, Trevor. Tyler's composure cracked. This isn't business. This is personal, and you know it. You've destroyed my family over some hurt feelings about a dinner party. Trevor's expression hardened. Hurt feelings? Is that what you think this is about? He stood and walked to the window, his back to Tyler. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of years of accumulated anger. Do you remember my first Christmas with your family? I was 23, fresh out of college, trying to fit in with Brooke's world. I brought a bottle of wine, the best I could afford on my salary. Your father looked at the label and said, "How thoughtful. The help must have recommended this." Tyler shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Do you remember Brooke's birthday party 2 years ago? I'd just closed a major deal, made more money in 6 months than your father made all year. When I mentioned it, you said, "Good for you, Trevor. It's nice when charity cases get lucky." Trevor turned back to face Tyler, his eyes cold as winter. 8 years of that, Tyler. 8 years of being treated like I was beneath you, unworthy of basic respect. 8 years of watching my wife choose your approval over our marriage. We were wrong, Tyler said quickly. I admit it. We were arrogant and cruel, and we treated you badly. But this is destroying innocent people. Innocent. Trevor's laugh was sharp. Your family has been living on borrowed money for years, using company funds for personal expenses, making business decisions based on ego rather than economics. You call that innocent? Tyler's face flushed. So we made mistakes. Every family business has problems. That doesn't mean we deserve to lose everything. No, Trevor agreed. You deserve to lose everything because you're small, petty people who mistake cruelty for strength. The financial irregularities were just the mechanism. Trevor returned to his desk and pulled out a file. Would you like to know what your family really cost me, Tyler? Not in money. I have more than enough of that. In self-respect. In the ability to trust people I loved. In 8 years of my life spent trying to earn approval from people who were never going to give it. He opened the file and spread several photographs across the desk. These are from the private investigator I hired 6 months ago. Pictures of your sister and Chase in hotel rooms, restaurant parking lots, your family's lake house. I could have ended this quietly, privately. I could have confronted Brooke, demanded marriage counseling, fought to save what we had. Tyler looked at the pictures and paled. Trevor, I didn't know. But I didn't do that, Trevor continued, because I finally understood something. Your family doesn't respect honesty or forgiveness or second chances. You only respect power. So I decided to speak to you in the only language you understand. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs. When he looked up, there was something different in his expression, not the arrogance Trevor was used to, but something closer to genuine fear. What do you want? Tyler asked finally. Money? An apology? What will it take to end this? Trevor's smile was sharp. I want you to understand something, Tyler. This isn't ending. This is just beginning. He pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. While I was investigating your sister's affair, I found some interesting things about your family's business practices. The Riverside Development Project, for instance. Did you know that the environmental impact studies were falsified? That your family's company has been dumping construction waste in protected wetlands for the past 3 years? Tyler's face went white. That's not. We would never. Oh, but you would. And you did. I have photographs, soil samples, documentation showing that Whitmore Properties has been cutting costs by illegally disposing of toxic materials. Trevor's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. I also have evidence of building code violations, tax evasion, and bribery of local inspectors. The silence in the room was deafening. Tyler gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. I could have reported all of this to the authorities months ago, Trevor continued. Federal environmental crimes, tax fraud, corruption charges. Your family would be looking at decades in prison. But I didn't do that either. Why not? Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. Because prison would be too easy. Prison would make you martyrs, victims of an unfair system. Instead, I decided to let you destroy yourselves slowly, publicly, with the whole town watching. Trevor stood and walked around the desk, stopping just inches from Tyler. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Your father will recover from his heart attack, Tyler. And when he does, he'll watch as everything he built crumbles piece by piece. Your family will become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you mistake arrogance for strength. Tyler backed toward the elevator, his face pale with terror. You're insane. This isn't justice, it's sadism. This is what you created, Trevor corrected. You taught me that kindness is weakness, that respect has to be taken, that family loyalty means nothing compared to social status. I'm simply applying the lessons you taught me. As Tyler reached the elevator, Trevor called out one final time. Oh, and Tyler? The environmental crimes evidence goes to the FBI tomorrow morning. I thought you should know. The elevator doors closed on Tyler's horrified expression. Trevor returned to his desk and made a note in his calendar. Phase 5, federal investigation begins. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Mrs. Holbrook requesting emergency meeting. Says it's about the children. Trevor frowned. He and Brooke had never had children. The message made no sense unless. His private line rang. Trevor answered it cautiously. Yes. Trevor. It was Brooke's voice, but she sounded different. Desperate. We need to talk. There's something I never told you. Something about Chase. Trevor's expression didn't change, but internally, he felt a cold satisfaction. The final pieces were falling into place. I'm listening, he said. Chapter 7, The Final Truth. Brooke arrived at Trevor's office an hour later, but she wasn't alone. A young boy, perhaps 6 years old, held her hand tightly as they stepped off the elevator. The child had Chase's distinctive jawline and Brooke's green eyes, a combination that told Trevor everything he needed to know before Brooke said a word. Trevor studied the boy with clinical detachment. The timeline made sense now. The mysterious business trips Brooke had taken 2 years ago, the sudden weight gain she'd attributed to stress, the extended stay with her sick aunt in California. It hadn't been an affair that started recently. It had been going on much longer than he'd realized. His name is Austin, Brooke said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Austin Summers. The boy looked up at Trevor with curious eyes, apparently unaware of the magnitude of the moment unfolding around him. Trevor noted that Brooke had given the child Chase's surname, not his own. Even in this, she'd chosen her lover over her husband. Where has he been living? Trevor asked, his voice carefully neutral. With my aunt in San Diego. She's been helping me, helping us manage the situation. Brooke's composure was hanging by a thread. Chase wanted me to put him up for adoption. He said a child would complicate things, make it harder for us to be together openly. Trevor's expression didn't change, but internally he felt a familiar cold rage building. Chase had abandoned not just his lover, but his own child. The man was even more worthless than Trevor had initially believed. And now Chase is gone, and my aunt is sick. She can't care for Austin anymore. Brooke looked directly at Trevor for the first time since entering the office. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I destroyed our marriage, destroyed your trust, destroyed everything we had. But Austin is innocent in all this. The boy wandered over to Trevor's desk, fascinated by the expensive fountain pen lying there. Trevor watched him with careful attention, noting the intelligence in the child's eyes, the way he moved with quiet confidence. Austin, Brooke called softly. Come here, sweetheart. But the boy was examining Trevor's computer with the focused attention only children could manage. Are you my mommy's friend? He asked Trevor directly. Trevor looked down at the child, seeing Chase's features, but also something else. A spark of curiosity that reminded him of himself at that age. I used to be, he said quietly. She cries a lot, Austin said matter-of-factly. She says my daddy went away and isn't coming back. The simple statement hit the room like a physical blow. Brooke's tears started again, but she tried to hide them from her son. Trevor continued to study the boy, weighing options and consequences with the cold calculation that had served him so well in business. What exactly are you asking me to do? Trevor asked Brooke. I don't know, she admitted. I don't have anywhere else to go. No money, no family support now that you've destroyed the company. I'm 29 years old with a 6-year-old son and no skills except planning charity events for rich people. You could get a job. Doing what? Who's going to hire Richard Whitmore's daughter after what's happened? The story is all over the news. Everyone knows what my family did to you, what I did to you. Her voice broke. I'm unemployable. Trevor was quiet for several minutes, thinking. Austin had found a paperweight on his desk, a crystal pyramid that threw rainbow patterns across the wall when tilted toward the light. The boy was completely absorbed in the play of colors, oblivious to the adult drama surrounding him. There's a condition, Trevor said finally. Brooke looked up sharply. What kind of condition? Chase signs over all parental rights. Permanently. No contact, no visitation, no financial responsibility. Austin becomes legally mine to protect or place as I see fit. The words hung in the air like a sword. Brooke's face went pale. You want to adopt him? I want to ensure he's protected from the kind of man who abandons his own child when things become inconvenient. Trevor's voice was ice cold. Chase Summers is a coward and a user. I won't have him surfacing in 5 years demanding visitation rights or trying to use Austin as leverage. And if Chase agrees? Trevor walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Then Austin gets a trust fund that will ensure he never wants for anything. He gets the best education money can buy. He gets a stable home with someone who understands what it means to be abandoned by the people who should protect you. And me? Trevor turned back to face her. You get a choice. You can take the divorce settlement I offered, the house, the money, your freedom. You can start over somewhere else, build a new life, make your own way in the world. Austin will know where you are, and when he's old enough, he can decide for himself whether he wants a relationship with you. Brooke's tears were flowing freely now. You're asking me to give up my son. I'm asking you to put his needs before your own for the first time in his life, Trevor corrected. I'm asking you to think about what's best for him instead of what's convenient for you. The boy looked up from the paperweight, apparently sensing the tension in the room. Mommy, why are you sad? Brooke knelt down and pulled Austin into a hug, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. Trevor watched the interaction with careful attention, noting the genuine love between mother and child, but also the fear and desperation that colored every moment. Austin, sweetheart, Brooke said through her tears, how would you like to live in a big house with lots of books and toys? The boy pulled back to look at her face. Would you live there too? Brooke glanced at Trevor, who remained stone-faced. Not right away, baby, but I would visit sometimes. And you'd have someone very smart and strong to take care of you. Austin looked over at Trevor with the serious expression children wore when making important decisions. Would you read me stories? Trevor felt something shift inside his chest, an emotion he'd thought he'd buried years ago. Every night, he heard himself say, and would you teach me to fly in the helicopter? Despite everything, Trevor almost smiled. When you're older, Austin nodded gravely, as if this settled all the important details. Okay, but I want to keep my bear. You can keep whatever you want, Trevor assured him. Brooke was openly sobbing now, but she managed to nod. Okay, yes. If Chase agrees to sign the papers, if you promise to take care of him, if you promise he'll know I love him. He'll know, Trevor said quietly. As if summoned by the agreement, Trevor's phone rang. The caller ID showed a Boston number he didn't recognize. Excuse me, he said, stepping into his private office to take the call. Trevor. It was Chase's voice, strained and desperate. We need to talk. Do we? Look, I know you're angry about Brooke, but this has gone far enough. You've made your point. You've destroyed her family. You've humiliated everyone involved. What more do you want? Trevor's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I want you to come back to Millfield Chase. We have some papers to sign. Papers? Parental rights, custody agreements, that sort of thing. There's a child involved that you seem to have forgotten about. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Chase spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. How did you? I know everything, Chase. I've always known everything. The question is whether you're going to do the right thing for once in your worthless life, or whether I'm going to have to make that decision for you. What are you talking about? Trevor's voice dropped to the tone he used in boardrooms when crushing competitors. I'm talking about the federal investigation into environmental crimes at Whitmore Properties. I'm talking about your signature on documents authorizing illegal waste disposal. I'm talking about 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy and environmental terrorism. Another long silence. I never signed anything like that. Are you sure? Because I have documents that say otherwise. Amazing what modern technology can do with signature samples and document production. It was a bluff, But Trevor delivered it with such conviction that Chase's panicked breathing was audible through the phone. "You're lying." "Am I? Would you like to bet your freedom on that assumption?" Chase was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was defeated. "What do you want?" "I want you on a plane to Hartford tonight. I want you in my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with a signed renunciation of all parental rights to Austin Summers. I want you to disappear from both their lives permanently. And if I do that, then you get to keep your freedom and start fresh somewhere else. Europe, maybe. I hear the weather's nice. And if I don't?" Trevor's smile was predatory. "Then you find out exactly how creative I can be when people disappoint me." The line went dead. Trevor returned to the main office, where Brooke was still holding Austin, whispering promises and apologies into his hair. "Chase will be here tomorrow morning," Trevor announced. "After that, it will be over." Brooke nodded without looking up. "Thank you," she whispered. Trevor looked down at the woman who had been his wife, holding the child who would soon be his responsibility, and felt the final piece of his revenge clicking into place. Not through destruction this time, but through something harder: mercy with conditions, forgiveness with consequences. "Austin," he said quietly, "would you like to see your new home?" The boy looked up with bright eyes. "Can we go in the helicopter?" Trevor's smile this time was genuine. "Absolutely." Chapter 8. The Transaction. Chase arrived at Trevor's office the next morning looking like a man walking to his execution. His usual polished appearance was gone. Stubble shadowed his jaw. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there was a hollow desperation in his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night spent contemplating his limited options. Trevor was waiting in the conference room with his legal team, the custody documents spread across the mahogany table like a formal surrender. Austin was not present. Trevor had arranged for him to spend the morning with Patricia, who had volunteered to show him the building's observation deck and explain how helicopters worked. "Sit down, Chase," Trevor said without looking up from the papers. "We have business to conclude." Chase remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. "I want to know what kind of game you're playing here. This is insane. You can't just take someone's child." Trevor's attorney, David Chun, spoke without emotion. "Mr. Summers, the documents are straightforward. You're voluntarily relinquishing all parental rights to the minor child Austin Summers. In exchange, you'll be released from any financial obligations, and Mr. Holbrook will assume full legal and financial responsibility for the child's welfare." Voluntarily. Chase's laugh was bitter. "You call blackmail voluntary?" Trevor finally looked up, his expression calm and businesslike. "I prefer to think of it as a cost-benefit analysis. You sign the papers, you're free to start over wherever you choose. You don't sign them, and we find out whether a jury believes you knowingly participated in environmental crimes that could have poisoned half of Millfield's groundwater." Chase slumped into a chair, the fight going out of him. "You really are a vindictive bastard." "Yes," Trevor agreed pleasantly. "I learned from the best." The signing took less than 10 minutes. Chase's signature was shaky but legally binding, witnessed by David Chun and notarized by a court officer Trevor had brought in for the occasion. With each document signed, Chase seemed to shrink further into himself. "There's one more thing," Trevor said as Chase prepared to leave. "I want you to understand something about the choice you're making here." Chase paused at the door, not turning around. "Austin is 6 years old. For the rest of his life, he's going to wonder why his biological father abandoned him. He's going to ask questions about you, want to know what kind of man you were, whether you ever loved him." Trevor's voice was quiet but carried clearly across the room. "I could tell him that you were a coward who ran when things got difficult. I could tell him that you saw him as an inconvenience, a complication that threatened your comfortable life. I could make sure he knows exactly what kind of man his father really was." Chase turned around, his face pale. "Trevor, please." "Or," Trevor continued, "I could tell him that you loved him but couldn't provide the life he deserved. I could tell him that you made the difficult decision to let someone else raise him because you wanted what was best for him, not what was easiest for you." The two men stared at each other across the conference room. Chase's eyes were bright, with unshed tears. "Which story he hears depends entirely on how you conduct yourself from this moment forward," Trevor said. "Disappear, Chase. Build a new life somewhere else. Don't contact Brooke. Don't contact Austin. Don't ever try to insert yourself back into their lives. Do that, and Austin will grow up believing his father was a good man who made a hard choice." Chase nodded silently and walked toward the elevator. Just before the doors closed, he spoke one last time. "Take care of him," he said quietly. "Whatever you think of me, he's innocent." "I know," Trevor replied. "That's why I'm doing this." After Chase left, Trevor remained in the conference room reviewing the custody documents. David Chin gathered his papers and prepared to leave. "The adoptions should be finalized within 60 days, David said. "After that, Austin Holbrook will be legally your son in every sense." Trevor nodded. "And Brooks access?" "Limited to supervised visitation twice a month until Austin turns 18, at which point he can decide for himself whether to maintain contact. She has no legal claim to custody or any decision-making authority regarding his welfare." Trevor stood and walked to the window. In the distance, he could see Millfield Elementary School, where Austin would likely be enrolled in the fall. The boy would grow up in the same town where Trevor had been dismissed and humiliated, but he would grow up as a Holbrook, with resources, protection, and the kind of power that ensured respect. "There's something else," David said, consulting his notes. "The environmental investigation into Whitmore Properties has been accelerated. The FBI wants to interview you next week about your business relationship with the company." Trevor's smile was cold. "I'll be happy to cooperate fully. I'm sure they'll find my documentation quite thorough." That afternoon, Trevor picked up Austin from Patricia's office and drove him to see his new home. Not the modest house Trevor had grown up in, but a sprawling estate on Millfield's most prestigious street. The house had once belonged to the Morrison family, old Connecticut money that had looked down on the Whitmores the same way the Whitmores had looked down on Trevor. Austin explored the house with the wide-eyed wonder of a child discovering a palace. The library impressed him most, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, comfortable reading chairs positioned near tall windows, and a rolling ladder that he immediately wanted to climb. "Will you really read me stories every night?" Austin asked, running his small hands along the spines of the books. "Every night," Trevor confirmed. "And when you're older, you can read them yourself." "What about my mommy? Will she read to me too?" Trevor knelt down to Austin's eye level. "Your mommy will visit sometimes, and when she does, I'm sure she'd love to read to you. But most of the time, it will be just you and me." Austin nodded gravely. "That's okay. You seem nice." The simple acceptance of a 6-year-old hit Trevor harder than any boardroom victory ever had. This child, innocent of the adult's failures and betrayals, was willing to trust him based on nothing more than a promise of bedtime stories and helicopter rides. That evening, Trevor fulfilled his first promise. Austin, dressed in new pajamas and clutching the teddy bear he'd brought from California, curled up next to Trevor on the massive bed in what would become the boys' room. Trevor read from a collection of classic children's stories, his voice gentle and patient as Austin asked questions about each character and plot development. "Trevor," Austin said as his eyes grew heavy, "are you going to be my new daddy?" Trevor was quiet for a moment, considering the weight of the question. "Would you like that?" "I think so. My old daddy went away, and that made Mommy very sad. But you don't seem like you would go away." "I won't go away," Trevor promised. "Not ever." As Austin drifted off to sleep, Trevor remained sitting beside the bed, watching the child's peaceful breathing and contemplating the strange turn his revenge had taken. He'd set out to destroy the people who had humiliated him, and in many ways he'd succeeded. The Whitmore family was ruined, their company destroyed, their social standing obliterated. But somehow, in the process of taking everything from them, he'd gained something he'd never expected: a son who would carry his name and inherit his empire, but who might also inherit the capacity for mercy that Trevor had thought he'd lost forever. His phone buzzed with a text from Brooke. "Thank you for keeping your promise. I know Austin will be safe with you." Trevor looked down at the sleeping child and typed back, "He'll be more than safe. He'll be loved." It was the first completely honest thing he'd said to Brooke in months. Chapter 9. The New Order. 6 months later, Trevor stood in the same country club ballroom where he'd been humiliated, but this time as the guest of honor. The Millfield Community Foundation was presenting him with their Philanthropist of the Year award, recognizing his contributions to education, environmental cleanup, and child welfare services. The irony was exquisite. The same people who had treated him as an outsider now competed for his attention, his approval, his investment in their projects. Money, as he'd always known, had a way of transforming perspective. Austin sat at the head table beside him, impeccably dressed in a miniature tuxedo and charming the room with his 6-year-old observations about the evening's entertainment. In the past months, the boy had blossomed under Trevor's care, confident, articulate, and displaying an intelligence that reminded Trevor of himself at that age. "Daddy," Austin whispered during the appetizer course, "why is that man staring at us?" Trevor followed his son's gaze to a corner table where Richard Whitmore sat with his wife. The man had aged dramatically since his heart attack, thinner, grayer, and carrying himself with the defeated posture of someone who'd lost everything that mattered to him. He'd been watching Trevor and Austin with a mixture of hatred and something that might have been regret. "Some people have trouble accepting change," Trevor told Austin quietly. "They get stuck thinking about the past instead of focusing on the future. Is that why Mommy moved away?" Brooke had taken the settlement and relocated to Portland, Oregon, where she'd enrolled in nursing school and was slowly building a new life. She called Austin twice a week and visited once a month, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Austin was Trevor's son now, legally and emotionally, and Brooke had become something closer to a distant relative than a parent. "Your mother needed to figure out who she wanted to be," Trevor explained. "Sometimes adults have to start over, just like kids do when they go to a new school." Austin nodded seriously. At 6, he was remarkably adaptable, taking life's changes with the resilience of youth. He'd started first grade at Millfield Academy, the private school where he was already showing signs of academic excellence. His teachers reported that he was reading at a 4th grade level and had a particular aptitude for mathematics and logical reasoning. The evening's program began with remarks from Mayor Davidson, a man who'd once ignored Trevor completely but now sought his counsel on every major municipal project. The environmental cleanup of the former Whitmore development site had been completed under Trevor's supervision, turning the poisoned wasteland into a nature preserve dedicated to Austin's name. When Trevor was called to the podium to accept his award, the applause was thunderous. He looked out over the crowd, seeing faces that had once dismissed him now regarding him with carefully cultivated respect. Some of them, he knew, still harbored resentment. Others had genuinely come to appreciate his contributions to the community. The distinction no longer mattered to him. "Thank you for this honor," Trevor began, his voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. "When I first came to Millfield, I was young and naive enough to believe that respect was something that would be given freely if I just worked hard enough, contributed enough, proved myself worthy enough." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "I've learned since then that respect, like success, is something you take, not through cruelty or vindictiveness, but through excellence, through being so indispensable, so valuable, so thoroughly competent that ignoring you becomes impossible." In the audience, he could see Tyler Whitmore shifting uncomfortably. The man had found work as a mid-level manager at a construction company in Hartford, a significant step down from his former position, but steady employment nonetheless. Trevor had made certain Tyler's environmental crimes would never come to light as long as he remained quietly in his new role. "The projects we've completed together, the scholarship fund, the environmental restoration, the new community center, these aren't just investments in Millfield's future. They're investments in the idea that where you come from matters less than where you're going." Austin was watching him with rapt attention, absorbing every word with the seriousness of a child who understood that this moment was important, even if he couldn't grasp all the nuances. "I want to dedicate this award to my son, Austin, and to all the children who will grow up in this community. May they learn that true strength comes not from putting others down, but from lifting everyone up." As Trevor returned to his seat amid sustained applause, Austin reached over and took his hand. "Daddy, does this mean people like us now?" Trevor squeezed his son's small fingers and smiled. "It means people respect us now. Whether they like us or not is less important." After the ceremony, Trevor found himself approached by a steady stream of well-wishers and project proposals. The transformation was complete. He was no longer the outsider seeking acceptance, but the power broker whose approval others sought. Near the end of the evening, an unexpected visitor approached their table. Mrs. Patricia Morrison, the elderly widow whose family had once owned Trevor's current home, walked slowly across the ballroom with the aid of an elegant walking stick. "Mr. Holbrook," she said, her voice carrying the authority of old age and older money, "I wanted to congratulate you on your award." Trevor stood respectfully. Mrs. Morrison, thank you for coming. She looked down at Austin with the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen 8 decades of social change. And this must be your son. He has good manners. Austin stood and offered a small bow. Thank you, ma'am. Daddy taught me that good manners open more doors than good looks. Mrs. Morrison's eyebrows rose in approval. Wise advice. Tell me, young man, what do you want to be when you grow up? Austin considered the question seriously. I want to build things that help people, like Daddy does. An admirable goal. She turned back to Trevor. You know, the Morrison family made many mistakes over the years. We thought our name and our history entitled us to automatic respect. It took losing almost everything to understand that respect must be earned anew by each generation. Trevor inclined his head slightly. Thank you for sharing that wisdom. Take care of our old house, she said. And take care of that boy. He's going to change this town someday, just like you did. As the evening wound down, Trevor and Austin walked out to the parking lot where their driver waited. The boy had fallen asleep in Trevor's arms during the final speeches, exhausted by the late hour, but clutching his small bow tie like a trophy. Looking back at the country club, Trevor reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The Whitmores were gone. Richard working as a consultant for a small firm in New Haven, Tyler managing construction projects in Hartford, Brooke building a new life in Oregon. Chase had disappeared entirely, last reported living in Barcelona under an assumed name. The revenge he'd planned had been complete, but it had evolved into something more complex and ultimately more satisfying. He destroyed his enemies not through simple cruelty, but through the systematic application of consequences. He'd taken their power, their wealth, their social standing, and redistributed it all to serve his own vision of justice. More importantly, he'd gained a son, an innocent child who would grow up with all the advantages Trevor had been denied, but also with the values Trevor had learned through hardship. Austin would be strong without being cruel, powerful without being arrogant, successful without forgetting where success comes from. As they drove through the quiet streets of Millfield toward home, Trevor made a silent promise to the sleeping child in his arms. Austin would never know the humiliation of being dismissed or overlooked. He would never have to claw his way to respect or fight for recognition. But he would also never forget that with great power comes the responsibility to use it wisely. The scholarship kid who'd been married out of pity was gone forever. In his place was Trevor Holbrook, patriarch of a new dynasty, protector of his son's future, and architect of his own justice. The last laugh, it turned out, was worth waiting for. The Holbrook legacy was just beginning. Epilogue. 5 years later, Austin Holbrook, age 11, stood at the podium of Millfield Academy delivering his valedictorian speech to the 6th grade graduating class. In the audience, Trevor watched with quiet pride as his son spoke about the importance of kindness, the responsibility that comes with privilege, and the obligation to lift others up rather than tear them down. My father taught me, Austin said, his young voice carrying clearly across the assembly hall, that where you start doesn't matter as much as where you finish. But how you treat people along the way matters most of all. Trevor smiled, knowing that the lessons he'd learned through pain and humiliation had been transformed into wisdom that would guide his son toward a better kind of strength, the kind that builds rather than destroys, that protects rather than punishes. The Whitmore name was nearly forgotten in Millfield now, a cautionary tale told in whispers about the dangers of arrogance and cruelty. But the Holbrook name would endure, carried forward by a boy who would grow up understanding that true power serves a purpose greater than revenge. As Austin concluded his speech to thunderous applause, Trevor knew that his greatest victory wasn't the destruction of his enemies. It was the creation of something better to take their place. The last laugh, indeed, belonged to him. But more importantly, the future belonged to Austin. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.